Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Anna, and here's her story. Hey, Ollie, this is Anna again. I've written in twice before, once about my enabling covert narc stepfather who attempted a smear campaign with the family over a loan that's in my mother's name, not mine. He was saying that debt collectors were calling and after me for having failed to pay my debts off, which was proven false when my step grandfather showed my stepdad, who is 45 years and old, how to sign up with Credit Karma, which lists out all your current and past debts. Needless to say, it was confirmed that my mother and stepfather have the loan in their name and the debt collection calls are for them, not me. The second time I wrote in was about my BPD NPD mother and what it was like growing up with her. It was part of your Borderline Monster series, part 14, called 6 Degrees of Separation. I am not close to done sharing my experiences with my mother, but I thought there was something more pressing to share after the suggestion my husband made about sharing what it was like to not only work for a narc, but for your mother-in-law who is one, but to work for your mother-in-law who is one. Okay, gotcha. My husband has also written in before. He is the son, husband, and only golden child to his covert narc mother. In the video you made for my husband, you pointed out how clever she was in her wording in a letter she sent my husband. Well, you were right about that. My covert narc mother-in-law is incredibly intelligent, quick thinking, and the ultimate manipulator. She's so good at what she does, I'm convinced she could put a knife in your hand and smile at you calmly and sweetly and convince you to commit suicide while not having once obviously put you down or said the actual words kill yourself. She's so sneaky and clever it can be terrifying at times. We are no contact with her now and live over 2,500 miles away. But I still feel like I'm looking over my shoulder, just waiting for the unexpected attack. I have to admit I've put off writing in about my covert narcissistic mother-in-law because, if I'm being honest, she scares the shit out of me. But my husband made a good point when we were discussing our journey to realization and discovery of malignant narcissists. I'll give a brief history. Though I will write in later with a more detailed history, when I started dating my now husband, we were 21 years old. We're 29 now, and we were inseparable. But he lived at home with his mother, and I had just moved back with my parents less than a month before. From the first night we started dating, I stayed with him at his mother's house with the expectation of one night we stayed together at my parents'. While at my while wait, I'm sorry. After a while, when my mother-in-law noticed I wasn't really leaving and I was basically living out of paper bags, she offered for me to officially move in. I was so thrilled, as was my husband. It was rent-free as long as I followed the house rules and helped with chores. I was welcome to stay. At first, everything was wonderful. I was away from my crazy mother and enabling covert narc stepfather, and I was with someone I felt I could marry. I was able to save money and get out of credit card debt, and for the first time since my Nana was alive, I felt safe. After a while, though, I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells, but it was subtle, and I dismissed it thinking it must be me from living with my mother and then roommate ex BPD friend from from high school for 2 years. I mean, my husband's mother never called me names, raised her voice, got aggressive, or threatened me. So I figured walking on eggshells was a habit I had brought with me from previous experiences. A year and a half into our relationship, we were still living with my husband's mother, and I had been working at Starbucks for nearly 5 years. I had dropped out of college after having a 3.9 GPA and sabotaging myself into academic probation and withdrawing from too many classes, even though I still had a 3.0 GPA at the time. Once I dropped out of college, wow, that story sounds familiar, Charlene. She did the same thing. She did the same thing in college. Same thing. Once I dropped out of college, I continued to work at Starbucks, but I had no further vision of the future. I was just working to work to make a living, if that's what you could really call it. I really enjoyed working for Starbucks. It was a great company for the time and place of my life. It was exactly what I needed. I've heard that actually working for them is pretty good. Their benefits are good. So people get stuck there. I have a couple friends who currently work at Starbucks, and they do it just for the flexible hours, and the benefits are really good there. However, at my last store, I had a narcissistic male manager that constantly hit on the women that worked at our store. He would show up late and on several occasions disappear for hours on his shift, and none of us knew where he went. If he wanted to get a day off work, I knew what I had to do. I would go in on my day off with my hair and makeup done, high heels, low cut shirt, and smile, even though bile was threatening to come up. Just having to smile at my manager like he was the most amazing person I had ever met. I am not proud of the fact that I would have deliberately dress and look a certain way to flatter his ego so that I could get time off work I needed, but at the time it was so that I could go to school. He refused to work with my schedule otherwise. Long story short, me, my coworkers, and several customers complained about this manager, but he never seemed to disappear. Our district manager continued to support and protect him because our store was always high in sales. Oftentimes, our district manager would make it known who was ratting the manager out and then leaving us to fend for ourselves. The tension in the store got so bad that people stopped trying to reach the district manager because nothing would happen, and then we would suffer walking on eggshells at work for days or weeks at a time. I felt trapped, but I needed the money to continue to work off my debts, student loans, and pay for my expenses outside the house. This is when my mother-in-law offered me a position at her law firm. She needed an assistant because her assistant of 5 years had left and the woman who had replaced her quit after only 4 days. Both my husband and father-in-law, who was divorced from my mother-in-law, warned me not to take the job, but neither could put words into words why. At the time, it seemed like an opportunity. I would have an office job, get experience I didn't have, and would be paid $6 an hour more, work predictable hours, and have weekends off. I hadn't had a weekend off in 7 years, so it sounded amazing. When we discussed the job, she said that I would be trained. I was not. In fact, when I started talking to her bookkeeper and going through her files, I came to realize that in the 18 years that my mother-in-law had been in business, that she had at least 18 assistants. On average, that's an assistant per year. Her last assistant took up 5 of those years. Another there for a year and a half, me for a year and a half. So imagine how short of time some of those people stayed. The woman that had quit after only 4 days was a neighbor of ours. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now looking back, once she quit, my mother-in-law changed her attitude about our once beloved neighbors to slowly and painfully sabotaging the relationship. She hated our neighbor's wife for leaving, but more so because our neighbor now knew what a monster my mother-in-law was behind closed doors and had the wherewithal to leave before getting trapped. I, however, did not take the hint. I intended to go into detail of the things that my mother-in-law did to me while working for her, but I wanted to give a side story that I feel best sums up the experience that I had working for her. There was a girl that used to work as my mother-in-law's assistant for about 2 to 3 weeks, several months to a shoot. I'm sorry. Several months to a year after working there, one of the other assistants, who I knew, ran into her while shopping and asked, "How have you been doing?" The girls responded, "Still in therapy after working for Joe." While the girl was joking, this best sums up my experience working for my mother-in-law. If a complete stranger after only 2 weeks was still reeling over her experience, then imagine how I felt after a year and a half of working for her. The first year still living under her roof and paying off my car to her as well. Therapy doesn't even come close to being enough help after what that woman did to my brain. Now on to the nitty-gritty. Working for my mother-in-law was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. Let me first explain why it was the worst thing that could have that could have ever done that I could ever have done for my physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional health. For starters, I already had PTSD from my own childhood, but then this woman came along and she triggered a full-blown anxiety disorder. While I worked for her, I suddenly developed diagnosed OCD. I had no idea at the time what was happening to me. All I knew was that I was anxious all the time to the point of making myself sick in the stomach. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, I needed to use hand tantalizer all the time. Everywhere, no matter what I was doing, I began that checking car door handles, office door handles, the voicemail at work multiple times, lights, cell phone, refusing to eat certain food for fear of contamination. The list sadly goes on and on. I probably would have ended up with OCD at some point. After all the stress in my life, I was bound to be triggered at some point. But it never truly manifested until I started working for that woman. I would spend hours after work having repetitive thoughts over and over, trying to remember if I had turned off the lights, put the phones to voicemail, mailed the documents to the correct people, remembered to mark the hearing dates correctly in our calendar. I would be sick with worry until I exhausted myself into sleep. I slept horribly, dreaming constantly about work and possible disasters. I woke up anxious, went to bed anxious, and then it followed me into my dreams, relationships, nearly every aspect of my life, making me so paranoid it was difficult to function. My mother-in-law gaslit, projected, deflected, isolated, emotionally tortured me for months and months. For starters, I was her sole and only assistant. There was no other employees other than a bookkeeper that came in once a week or so, or every other week, to do payroll. Outside of that, it was always just her and me. She did rent out the spare office to another firm. She did that. She did a completely different line of law, but they were in and out and minded their own business. While I was later hired by them as well, I didn't work for them as an assistant or paralegal. Instead, I created websites, flyers, newsletters, and such for them. So 90% of the time, it was just me and my mother-in-law. One time, my mother-in-law asked me to make a copy of a document and send it to the opposing counsel and then return the document to her inbox. I did as asked. A few days later, she calls me into her office and had an angry look on her face. She asked me where the document was. I said it was in her inbox, as she asked me to do. She nearly yelled at me, "No, it isn't." I looked. I said, "I know I put it in there. Let me have a look." I reached over to sift through the pile of documents in the inbox, and she literally slammed her hand down on the top of the pile and said, "I already looked," and refused to let me look for myself, even though I knew it was in there. She continued for an hour to make comments, making me feel incompetent, and that she couldn't believe that I had lost the original document, and that I scanned a copy of the document, and that a scanned copy of the document was useless. She nitpicked how I had filed documents in the client's folder, even though she had been looking at the folder for days and hadn't said a thing until this moment. Finally, she got up to go to the restroom. I don't know what came over me. Maybe at this point I was so tired of being wrong about things that I knew I hadn't messed up and grew some balls. But I dashed into her office and as quickly as I could went through the pile of documents. In her inbox, sure enough, a few documents in. There it was. I pulled it out quickly, ran to my chair, to wait her arrival. When she walked back into the room, I said, "Joe, I found the document you were looking for." She raised her eyebrows skeptically and stared at me with the usual bored and unamused glaze as I had held it out for her to see. As she went to grab and look it over, I said, "It was in your inbox. You must have just missed it." She took the paper and didn't say a word. She walked away and didn't talk to me for hours. A similar situation happened where she was preparing for an important hearing and she needed me to make copies for a document as an exhibit for some binders that needed to be constructed. I took the document off the coffee table in her office. At this point, the OCD and her constantly accusing me of screwing things up or misplacing things I didn't. I paid very close attention to where I placed things and picked them up from. I even had a list on my desk that I hid from her, just so that I knew I wasn't going crazy. Well, I made the copies and then brought the document back to her office and placed it down on the coffee table as I had found it. I would have said something to her about it, but her head was down and you never interrupted her. This was an unspoken rule. One that I broke for the first several weeks, not understanding that even if it was urgent or important information, you do not disturb Joe under any circumstances. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Anyways, put back the document. So I put the document back in its place as I found and went about my day as usual. 5 o'clock came and I started packing up because I had plans to meet up with my dad nearby for dinner. I didn't get to see my dad that often, so it was a big deal. Of course, Joe calls me into her office and says, "Where's the document I asked you to copy?" I said, while pointing at the table, "It was here. This is where I found it and left it." "Well, it's not there, so where did you put it?" She wouldn't allow me to touch any of the files near her to see if she had accidentally placed the document somewhere else. So I looked at the files that pertain to that client in the filing area outside her office. I knew it wasn't in any of them, but I was more afraid if I didn't look, she would have lost it even more on me. I looked for almost an hour before I said, "My dad is waiting for me. I need to go." At that point, I'd been crying, and she refused to even look at me. After dinner, which was a bleak event because I spent the whole time venting and crying, I went home to my husband, explained to him the situation at work and my frustration. Then we heard the garage door open, and I awaited having to see my mother-in-law after a terrible day at work. She walked in as though nothing was wrong. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't in a bad mood either. I asked, "Did you find this document?" She said yes, it was tucked into one of the files on my floor near my desk. She didn't apologize, obviously, and she didn't admit that it was her own fault that she couldn't find the documents. But I think she was still going to instill doubt in me so that I would take the blame for having carelessly put the document back in the wrong place. I don't know, but I know I didn't because I wrote it down so I would know in case something like this happened. She could have texted or called me to let me know that she found the document, seeing that I left visibly upset over the matter. But of course, she wanted me to be upset and she wanted to ruin my dinner with my dad that I was looking forward to. This type of situation happened regularly and weekly. She would constantly set me up for failure. I received no training whatsoever, as the previous assistant only lasted 4 days and the one before her was gone, and I was told specifically not to bother her. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law refused to teach me anything. She got a huge high off telling me I was wrong, but then refused to explain to me why I was wrong and how to correct it. I'd like to add that I never truly had any office job position. I worked as an assistant to a party planning manager for a couple months when I was 18 years old, but I was 23 years old when I started working in a law office. I had no training as a paralegal, no prior experience as an assistant to an attorney, no prior knowledge of being an office manager. When she hired me, I hadn't used a copier in years. I didn't know how to weigh mail or what going rates were per stamp, and I had never had to mail anything before. I never filed documents before, let alone interpret their meaning. You get the point. My mother-in-law had a habit of hiring assistants that had no legal experience as well as limited skills in the office. It was a sixth sense of control, power, and supply. She would rather her business suffer due to an inexperienced assistant than either train or hire an assistant that was qualified for the job. Heaven forbid someone challenge her authority, because no trained paralegal is going to put up with this. She can't hire a real paralegal. No real paralegal. The reason the narcissist hires you is because nobody official in that capacity would put up with their bullshit. That's why. Nobody certified, a certified paralegal, would put up with this type of bullshit. Not in a one lawyer office, maybe in a major law firm where as a paralegal you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars to put up with that bull. No paralegal's gonna put up with that bullshit. That's why they come to you. To give myself some credit, I'm a fast learner, and when you are neglected by your own mother, you receive little to no help on anything in your life, as I'm sure most scapegoats understand. You learn how to take care of things, how to adapt quickly, and to be self-sufficient. My mother-in-law only told me once after I had quit to start my own business that I was a good assistant. However, she was comparing me to my replacement, who clearly wasn't meeting her standards. Surprise, surprise. My mother-in-law never once told me I did a good job or that she appreciated my hard work or dedication, which brings me to two funny examples of just how much she didn't believe in letting me know how I was doing a good job. One day I received a box of chocolate-covered strawberries from the law firm that rented the space out in Joe's space, and it had a little card that said, "Happy Assistant Appreciation Day. Thank you for all you do." Later that day, I was having a cigarette with my mother-in-law. I am no longer a smoker, but boy, did I need to get through that, working through in that office. And she commented on the box of chocolate-covered strawberries, and I asked her what they were for. I explained, and her response was why, even though I explained that it was Assistant Appreciation Day. Additionally, around the time I was getting ready to leave her office to work on my own business, an attorney from the opposing side sent me a bouquet of flowers thanking me for helping her. Basically, we needed to reset a court date, but the opposing counsel was in another state and very ill at the time. My mother-in-law wanted to change the date of the hearing, and so that I had to get the opposing counsel to agree. She was, however, as I said, sick and out of the state, but we needed to get this document filed as soon as possible, as the hearing was going to happen and there was a deadline of how late you could file for a changed date. Anyways, it was a rough process, but I got it done, and she was very appreciative. Joe, however, was to be expected, annoyed and angry, saying it shouldn't have taken that long. But she asked me to get it done, and so I did what had to be done. As usual, instead of being appreciative, she criticized my efficiency, even though she knew the circumstances of the situation, and it was her request, not the other side's, for a new hearing date. Needless to say, when the flower arrived, we both assumed that they were for her. However, she looked at the card and it had my name on it. When I opened the card and told her who it was from, my mother-in-law looked pissed and said, "That's nice," in a flat tone, and stomped off to her office. There was this one morning where my mother-in-law was freaking out, so I went into her office and asked her what the problem was. She told me her printer and her wireless mouse weren't working and asked me to call her IT guy. I said, "Let me look first." But she held up her hand and fired a glare at me, saying, "I've been trying. I don't have time for this." The look on her face gave me pause, and I knew better than to suggest me having a look a second time. Well, I called the IT guy and he was busy and had a really large job to do at a university school that day. But he offered to come by on his way and see if there was a quick fix. He was very intelligent, kind man and made good money for his skills. He charges $3.75 an hour, and believe me, he's worth every penny. So our IT guy came in, and my mother-in-law went outside to talk on her cell and have a cigarette. After a few moments, the IT guy asked me into her office and explained what happened. My mother-in-law had failed. My mother-in-law had failed to push the printer paper drawer shut all the way, and the wireless mouse hadn't stopped and hadn't in fact stopped working. When my mother-in-law went to replace the battery, she didn't push them in all the way. I apologized profusely that he had spent time stopping by the office. Why? Charge her for it. I explained that I tried to look at it before calling him, but she refused to let me look. He just smiled knowingly, saying it wasn't a problem and that no need to tell Joe what she had done and to tell her that the problem had been fixed. Yeah, because he was going to charge her. That's what I would have done. We had a phone system where if someone was on the phone, you couldn't put the phone to go to voicemail. Most days this wasn't an issue, but every once in a while, as a way to punish me, though she would never admit to it, I know she did it on purpose because most days she would pick up on the second line knowing I would need to put the phones on voicemail because I could leave work. But on a bad week or a bad day when she felt like it was a good time to punish me, she would pick up the phone on the first line just a minute or two before 5 o'clock, and then I would literally have to sit at my desk and just wait. Once I had to wait for 45 minutes to be off the phone just so I could put it on voicemail. She didn't comment or notice that I had stayed an additional 45 minutes waiting on her. I would have left. I would have left. Why would you sit there? I always knew it was going to be a bad week if I walked in on a Monday morning to see my desk literally covered in papers with post-it notes all over. When I saw my desk would be covered, I mean legitimately I could see less than 10% of the desktop, and I had an L-shaped desk of two desks pushed together, so lots of surface space to cover. It was her way of letting me know it's coming. You don't know when or how bad, but it's coming. Those weeks were torture. One of the things that she would constantly do to me that drove me crazy was that she would have me gather documents for discovery requests for the opposite side, and basically I would need to provide all the documents being requested. I would have done this for weeks. I would send her emails reminding her that the project was complete and that she had a free moment, that I would like to go over it with her and make sure there was nothing that I missed or something that needed to be corrected. After a week, she didn't address the email. I would follow up by bringing it to her attention, and I had a few moments face to face. If she continued to ignore it, I would send out a second email. This would go on for weeks, and then finally on the day before or the day of the documents needing to be delivered, she would go over the pile, give it a glance over, and start berating me, pulling papers out dramatically, pointing out errors, missing documents, etc. Now, because she waited so long to review the documents with me, I pressed for time and frantic. She loved pushing me as close to deadline as possible just to see me scrambling. I can't even imagine how she could enjoy seeing me fumbling and panic when her own practice, reputation, and clients' lives were on the line. In those moments, I used to scream at myself inside my head why I was so stupid, how I could have missed things or made errors. But just yesterday, I watched an older video where you explain how they will confuse low self-esteem for low intelligence because narcissist preys on your low self-esteem and counts on it to make you feel unintelligent. Don't get me wrong. And you know what? I gotta say this, Anna. You go on and on and on and on trying to overcompensate, trying to prove you're not unintelligent, and you just run on and on and on and on and on. You overtell your stories. And it's an effect of dealing with a person like this. You are over telling your stories. I mean, it, and it's a result of you not feeling intelligent, trying to prove to everybody you're intelligent. Don't get me wrong, I'm human, and I did make mistakes while working in my mother-in-law's office, obviously. And here's you're just over-explaining everything. You're over-explaining everything. We get it. At this point, we get it. Your mother-in-law does horrible shit, manipulative shit, telling these stories over and over and over and over again with so much detail. You're over explaining it, and you actually sell past the point you want to get to. She used my low self-esteem as a means to question my confidence. I was a good assistant. I reworked many areas of her office to function better in today's digital world, and I reorganized her office to be more today. See, you understand? You're writing this like it's almost a commercial. I don't feel like you're telling me your story. I feel like you're trying to sell yourself. I reorganized her office to be more efficient and effective. I may not be the best assistant, but I was not terrible, and she made me feel. I was determined and dedicated, and it had not been for her need for narcissistic supply. It's not a need. It's narcissistic. It's not the supply. It's so you don't. In a way, it's so you don't leave, even though she keeps pushing him out the door, because she can't treat a certified paralegal this way. So to make you think you're not good enough, she's afraid you're going to go jump to another law office that's going to treat you correctly. That's why she's doing it. I was determined and dedicated that had not been for her need for narcissistic supply, she would have seen that she was lucky to have me, as I was being paid far less for the amount of work that I provided for her office, and I would have happily stayed around for years in that position had she treated me like a human being, but that's not what the narcissist does. What was worse is after a long day of torture, I would go home only to have to see the face of the woman that made me miserable all day. Most weekends were spent doing her chores, errands, and honey-do lists. If we had any plans, they were usually canceled, not because she ever asked us to, but it was implied in every other way. We lived for free under her roof. I was indebted to her because of my car. I was dating her son, and I was employed by her. It was the worst year and a half of my life, but I would do it again because had I not worked for her, I don't know what I would have discovered. I don't know if I would have discovered what an evil, manipulative woman she was, or at least not as quickly. My mother-in-law doesn't act as obviously malicious in her personal life. She is overtly kind and generous to the point of being uncomfortable. She had raised my husband as a golden child. She wasn't prepared for a girl that was scapegoated her whole life. My husband was taught not to have an opinion or a thought of his own, while I fought with every last breath to have my opinions and thoughts heard. At first, my mother-in-law tried to pull me in, as she had with her son. She was trying to groom me into compliance. She bought me a car, put a roof over my head in an attempt to control me and try to pull me under the trance that my husband had been under for 25 years. She didn't anticipate me fighting back, even on the most mundane things, speaking my mind, let alone having a mind of my own. When she realized I was not going under her trance and that I was wise to her manipulations, that's when the fangs came out. I think she believed she had me right under her thumb because she knew I was emotionally abused by my mother and that I was weakened from it and suffered from extreme low self-esteem. Believe me, I don't think I'm anything special, and I was totally weak back then. But my mother-in-law really didn't know what to do with a scapegoat. I even remember one time her and her and I talking, and she said something to the effect of, if you were my daughter, I would have dealt with your behavior issues differently. It gave me the creeps when she said that. I was telling her about my rebellious days, which weren't really rebellious, but my mother constantly viewed me as a bad child and always told me as such. When in fact my mother was very lucky. After all the shit she put me through, I didn't get into more trouble. My mother always made it seem like I was this huge angst-filled problem child, but I never drank, smoked, did drugs, had sex, or anything close to it in high school. I may not have had great grades, but I was a good kid. I was just mouthy and bratty because my mother was always yelling at me, calling me names, and threatening me. So the fact that my mother-in-law saw my mouthiness as a behavior issue after what my mother had done to me and what she would have dealt with me differently, for lack of a better word, I was appalled. This woman was out to control me, and if she couldn't control me, she was set on destroying me. Had I not worked for my mother-in-law, who knows now Had I not worked for my mother-in-law, who knows now how long it would have taken my husband to realize something was wrong with their relationship. I would have never thought to bring it up in therapy, and I would never have heard the words that started this journey to recovery, malignant narcissist. That day, after my therapist said those two words, I found the audio recording of your mother losing her shit, and it reminded me so much of my own conversations with my own mother. And for the first time in years, I knew what was wrong about my mother and my husband's mother, and life finally began to make some fucking sense. Thank you for sharing my story. I will contribute more of my story and channel and donate to the resistance. Anna. You have to understand, Anna, the reason your mother-in-law did what she did to you is because nobody certified would put up with that. No certified paralegals could have put up with that. That's why. That's why she did it. And once she realized you were good, and then she keeps you there, and that's why to keep you off balance, so you don't even think that you could do this somewhere else. So you're chained to her. So getting you and your husband away from her is the best thing you can possibly do. But because of all this, you over-explain everything. You run on and on and on and on, and you got to shorten it up. Because when you run on and on, you're going to lose people. And they're going to start thinking like, oh my God, it's on and on and on. You have to shorten it up. You've proven your point. You can do it in one story. You don't have to tell the same story, the repeat of the same story, even though it's happening at different times. It's the same behavior happening over and over and over again. So thank you for your contribution. I hope that helps. Understand, you're here in this, and she did what she did, and the reason she went through so many assists is because she couldn't hire anybody legitimate. That's why they hire you, because nobody legitimate would put up with your narcissist at work. That's why they hire you. So thank you again. I hope that helps. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just sponsor the channel in general, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. And if you're still unclear, wait for the instructional video link to pop up on the screen at the end of this video to walk you through all of that. If you're not seeing it, make sure your pop-up blocker is not on. Please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance.